Hey, everybody. This is Bishop John Selders, and welcome again to what I'm going to call a very listen. When you're dealing with local productions, Wi-Fi and other technical difficulties may occur. Uh, but Jim, this ain't network television. This is television on your own right here. Again, I'm Bishop John Selders, and welcome to another episode of what we call Relevant Conversations with yours truly, me, John Selders, and this is going to be an interesting conversation. The two persons we've asked to join us tonight to share in some conversations I have met along the way. You know, when you meet some folk along the way, and they just they're your people, but and you don't know exactly how they're your people, but you know that when you meet them, these are some of my folks. These are some of my people, and tonight is going to be that kind of conversation. I've said this often enough, but it bears repeating. I love doing this particular show because I get to talk to the people I likes. Mm-hmm. That's something right there. In my neck of the woods, they say that'll preach right there. That'll preach right there. So I appreciate very much them saying yes to being in conversation. Let me first introduce to you Brother Jim. Jim, let me get this name right, and you correct me if I'm wrong. Chapdelaine. I'm gonna get it in a minute. You're gonna correct me in a minute. Brother Jim is actually this award-winning musician, recording engineer, guitarist. I got a chance to dip down in some of his catalog a little bit, and I was like, wow. He's worked with, he studied music at Berklee School of Music here in New England, and has played with and worked on projects with somebody I really appreciate, Phoebe Snow. I know her work, and the Allman Brothers and other groups. Is known locally and regionally here in Connecticut and New England. Has worked on projects with Bruce Springsteen. Get out of here, and other folk. I've come to know him, however. With all that being said, I've come to know him as one of the leaders in the Indivisble movement here in Connecticut. And so, Jim, welcome to this platform, and I'm happy to have you join us. Now, before we get to talking too far, this other young man, I've witnessed and watched for some time. We've shared in some things. He's a faith leader that has some interesting cred and some interesting contexting. He's not only a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association and all of what that means. He's the former area coordinator. Brother Woulard also is a leader in the NAACP. Has done work in and around the conversation around reparations for Black folk here in the United States, and in particular is a leader in the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. That organization is a well-established organization. It's called INCOBRA, and they invited me into thing. We had some good fun a couple of years back here in and around Hartford, and they allowed me to be at least a reference and a leader, a local leader about the work that has gotten started and the connections, the historic connections here in Hartford. So I want to talk about their journeys and how their journeys from way back then gets them into what Congressman John Lewis calls good trouble these days. Brother Jim and Brother Woulard, Lett, welcome to this platform, and let me why don't you greet the people, say hello, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, John. Come on, Jim.
Well, yeah, thank you, Bishop, for having us, both of us. I need that kind of hype man traveling with me, man. I'll take you any day. Come on. You're upping my status somehow.
Well, thank you very much. Listen, Jim, look, why don't we begin with you? Talk a little bit about where you're from originally. Where are you from?
I grew up out in West Suffield, picking tobacco and working on farms. But I always had a band out there. And I remember thinking I knew what jazz was. And then I went to Berkeley and I realized the Allman Brothers are not jazz. There was Charlie Parker. I had to learn all about Train and all those people like that. Miles, of course. I had to learn what real jazz was. So, and then from there, I started playing. I have a weird story of how I got to play full time, and it was kind of where I started being an activist too. But I can tell you about that if you like.
Well, that's what I want to do. I want to situate the trajectory, because I would say all of us who are in the business of making good trouble these days come from different places and land here, and it's a network of us. So be my guest.
All right.
Continue
so
on with
me, I was going to Berkeley. I took a year off to study with this guitar player, Pat Metheny, and it was going good. He was a good teacher. I was a terrible student, and then I had like this lump here, and I went to doctor after doctor and doctor, and finally after 12 doctors, they said you have this rare angiosarcoma, and you have 1 year to live, and we're gonna. So I went through all these surgeries. I had a year of chemotherapy, and 2 days after chemo ended, I got a call. You want to go on the road 6 nights a week? I was bald and yellow, and I was jaundiced, and I thought, do I want to go back to college, or do I want to go on the road and do what I'm going to college for? So I took the gig, and I had to move back to Connecticut, oddly enough, to do it. And I went full time there. And I've never not been a full-time musician, except for now when I'm like half musician, half activist. And I became an activist because that cancer that I had is so rare and so fatal that I'm the oldest known survivor of metastatic disease on the planet right now. And so I learned how to advocate for other patients who, there's only 30 to 40 cases a year, maybe 100 across the world. And most of them are gone pretty quick. So I learned how through this association and stuff to fight for them to get treatment, and it changes outcomes. So I realized, in 2016, when we had that election, I realized some of those same skills would work here in the space that you and I share right now.
Wonderful, wonderful. Brother Woulard got disconnected. He'll jump back on when he can. So we'll just continue on and we'll catch him up. Well, thank you for this story. I heard just a little bit about your journey in and through cancer. So Jim, name where was that inflection point? I can tell you for me, the inflection point of what I would call my music journey, and of course my music journey is connected with religion. I was
Sure.
largely working in gospel music, right? So, but have done some other things. That's right. But there was, thank you. That's true. And yet, for me, the connection point for me was HIV. We were a number of my friends were getting sick and dying fairly quickly.
That would be
within
the
context.
early 80s.
That would be the early 80s. That's absolutely right. And so,
yeah.
And at some point felt like I needed to do something and get involved in something. And so my faith community in the town, my hometown, kind of got involved because of the folk we were related to, right? And we were connected. And that then, obviously I've had a trajectory of service to folk on the ground because of ministry, right? So I'm a third generation preacher. So this was a no-brainer that if there was something happening in the community, we got to be a part of it. And so so music and ministry and activism kind of worked hand in hand. When one was leading while the other two were supporting, and that's
the perfect triangle of things to come together. I would say there's very few things that are as awe-inspiring and maybe even a little fearful as seeing a gospel organ player run those changes and just change it up every time it goes through. They go through that song. It blows my mind. I listen to it all day. Yeah. So yeah, everybody has their own hooks that pull them into this thing, and I was always sort of political, but I hadn't really committed. I was more focused on this rare cancer thing. But it was when I realized, hey, these are kind of the same. That the same tools that we use there, we could use here, and that's connecting people and connecting the dots and getting out there, working in the community, and in some cases, making sure that the right candidates are running that are going to reflect our values, and having these rallies where I met you, where you were a powerful speaker and got people all riled up, and I hope you come and rile them up again on the 18th.
Absolutely, I will. Listen, there are a number of things that I'd like to talk about in relation to them. Let me see if we can get Brother Willie back on. He says he is in the waiting room, and yet I don't see him. He's in the green room.
I copied the link and just rebooted.
That's right. That's right. I don't see him in the waiting room. However, we just gonna keep going down the line, and we'll catch him. He'll jump in when he can get in. All right.
He found his way to you once, so he'll find you again.
That's right. That's right. Listen, so playing music, you're producing. How'd you get into TV? Talk a little bit about this TV thing.
Well, I was mostly a live musician. Then I started getting a taste for the studio, and the commute to a studio is sometimes 20 steps. For me, I still play live, but if I want to get paid to play live, I got to drive at least 100 miles. So, and I'm happy to do it. I love playing. I still do it a lot, and I love it. But I became a little bit of a studio rat, and my daughter was born, and I realized I can't be on the road 6 nights a week. I can't be getting up at 11 o'clock when I want to roll out of bed, because babies don't operate that way. And I really wanted to be there for it. I was told I wasn't supposed to have kids, so I got a good one. I only have one, but she's a good one. And I just wanted to be there for as much of it as I could. So I started producing records, and one thing led to another. And I started doing videos, like just putting a little music. I wrote some jingles, amongst which would be like the theme song for the Army National Guard, which they don't use it anymore, and they use the Army National Guard very differently these days. So that was a long time ago. But so I ended up doing a lot of weird stuff, which is what you do in a small market. If you go to LA or New York or Nashville, or maybe even Atlanta, you do a thing. You do a thing. That guy masters records. That guy mixes. That guy does rhythm guitar, whatever. I'm sure you know the drill, right? In a small market like where we are, you have to do a lot of things. And I like that because I'm ADD. So I like to bounce around and do a lot of different things. So I started writing for music for video. And that was back in the day when there were no music libraries. So you would score it like the same way you would tailor a suit, you know? It would be right down it. These days, it's always a library. Somebody's cutting and they have to cut to that track. So it can be a little tricky. I think it's not as fun. I mix a lot of that, and I'm happy to mix. I love mixing, but I'd rather score, you know.
Got it. You understand? We talking big shop, y'all. That I could take off, and we'll lose most of us, most of the folk who will be paying attention. But we will talk some more about that trajectory. I do understand in gospel music, it's very similar in that you know, I went to school initially to college to be an audio engineer. That's what I thought I wanted to be.
Yeah, sure.
And the college I went to, it was a small liberal arts college in St. Louis, in the St. Louis area, had a program. They didn't have a degree necessarily, but they had a program. And right. And so it was through that. One thing led to another. You get a gig, you get another gig. And I wasn't the best student as an undergraduate because I'd be in and out because, you know, gigging required that you had to go. And so I understand that, as well as you had to learn, you know, the different things to do. When you weren't, you know, in the big market. I didn't know what cartage was.
Oh, right.
I knew the back of the vehicle, whatever vehicle I had or I borrowed, and you schlep your stuff.
Yeah.
You know, you got, you know, not only do you have your rig, you got, you know, Bud's rig, and somebody had to have the sound system that we all kind of plugged and played through. And I had a little bit of experience with lows, highs, and you know, and mids, and, you know, faders, and, you know, everybody thinks they know what that is. But, you know, when you start to get degrees in separation, I'm going too far. I learned a lot about a whole lot of things, which led me to, you know, begin to write my own songs, right? That you hear a thing and I want to hear a thing. And that's what led, you know, ultimately to at least a little bit of career I had and have in music. And of course that led me into the theater. And so I did a lot of musical theater. My beloved and I met because I was the musical director in a local theater company that was doing a regional production of Dream Girls. That's how we met back in the 90s. So that's how it happens, right? You're doing one thing that leads to the next thing and the next thing, and then you get an opportunity to do this, that, and the third. And you know, some things work, other things don't work. You know, and all of it for me has been at least in part my muse and the inspiration for the activism. Right, so that you see a thing. I have a friend who's here in Connecticut who I met years and years and years ago because I got asked to be a speaker and to be a presenter at the People's Music Network. You ever heard of these folks?
I have, but there's so many organizations right now. It's hard to keep up.
Right, but you know who these folk are that were who were the early Pete Seeger, for example.
Oh, sure.
And, right. Charlie King and others. I got a chance to meet these folk who then invited me to say, hey, talk about music as you see it and as you've come to know it. And what I chose to speak about at that time, I chose to speak about protest music that but you didn't know was protest music. And I did it by talking about three artists, producers, songwriters that you wouldn't have necessarily, especially the folk I was speaking of, wouldn't have necessarily thought about them as activists and doing protest music of the 1960s and 70s. And so we talked about James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud.
No question.
Well, that was right. That was the anthem,
early on the scene for that.
That's right. Then I talked about Marvin Gaye. He did a record, the Mercy Mercy Me album.
That was like a hard pivot he made.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
This is where I'm at now.
And so Mercy Mercy Me, that song is about the ecology.
Yep.
That's the tag underneath or in the academic circles. That's the colon to that song. And then I talked about Curtis Mayfield. And some music, and I said you didn't, these folk were doing music where you have a singer songwriter musician and they play the guitar, right? And it was very acoustic. So some of this had production in it that then would throw you off, right? You got all the
talked about for sure.
Yes,
they evolved into that. And there was a moment, right, in the 60s, and they met the moment.
That's right. That's right. And yet, here I was talking about this in the 90s now. We were sharing these ideas and thinking about it in the late 90s. And I was saying, let's take this song apart. Let's get out of the production. It's 3 or 4 chords.
Right.
And let's do it. And we did it. We did an experiment. Took one of those songs and we just called out, the 1, the 4, the 5, there'd be a 2 in there, and back to the 5, maybe a 6, funky, but staying in there. And they were amazed. Many of them had never thought of these kinds of songs. And there's so many others. I just used those 3 in that particular presentation. But
come to mind too.
Absolutely. Your change is gonna come, right?
Yeah, that's like one. That's top 10.
That's right. It is what calls us in many ways, and the muse that causes us to use the term pivot to make a very specific switch into another lane while not leaving what you have been doing. Could you talk a little bit about, you mentioned it just at the start, but talk about your journey to Indivisble and the work that Indivisble is now up to.
There was an election, we all know it, in 2016, and I was surprised, but I wasn't like completely surprised because I could sniff that. I could see some stuff wasn't, the pieces of that puzzle were not fitting together the way they should. And so after that, I took a few days to just kind of think. I didn't work. I just, kind of did my thing. I walked around a lot. I talked to a few people. And the Indivisble, these guys released a pamphlet. That wasn't until 3-4 weeks later. I was looking for a group I could join. The last thing I wanted to do was start one because that's a lot of work, like and And then when I read this Indivisible pamphlet, it was about 20 pages long. It was, how do you deal with elected officials in a blue state? How do you deal with them in a red state? Carrot, stick. How do you get people elected? It was very simple. And I knew I didn't have to paint my face up. I didn't have to dress in camouflage. I could just organize some people, and we could get together and start doing some work. We didn't know what the work was yet, you know. So I would say I had 20 or 30 people at our first meeting in February of 2017, which was just after the Women's March. I think there was maybe 80 people, you know, and I had maybe 200 on Facebook, and now I have 7,500 on Facebook, and you know, 100 people always show up at a meeting, and we get good people elected. We educate people. We have educational seminars. We meet with our elected folks. I met with William Tong earlier today about, you know, holding the line, and he's doing a great job with that. And we started putting candidates out there, or backing candidates whose values aligned with ours, and we started winning. And so if you win enough, people want to be your friend. The other thing we did is to build community, and one of the ways we did it is I would visit Mothers United Against Violence, because, you know, every time there'd be a shooting, it would be on the news, except their shootings were not on the news. And so they would have a parade, or they'd have an incident. So I would make sure every year I wrote them a check. And I made it clear, this is a check that just goes one way. We don't want anything. I don't want any quid pro quo. This is just a thing to do, you know? So just doing things like that, honestly, that stuff made me feel better. I started to feel better. I don't know, maybe it's dopamine or something. But now it's reflexive, that kind of work. It kind of, you know, sometimes I'll go through a whole day and I forget, like, oh my God, I didn't pick up my guitar today. And I keep one in every room, so I can't get away from them. I can't escape. So I think there is an intersection with music, because you're comfortable building that loop with people, that energy loop, the give and take. You're comfortable doing it yourself. Being the clergy, you know how to build that loop, right? That goes, you give, they give back, you give, and pretty soon everybody's feeling good. Eddie,
Hey, brother, well, I don't know what happened, but here we go. This is what it is, right? Hopefully you get able to, that's right. The gremlins are in the interwebs.
I figured it out.
All righty. I hope you were able to hear some of where we are. Listen, let's talk a little bit about Brother Willie, your background a bit, and where you come from. Brother Willie, you know, but for the folks who are listening who will hear us, Brother Willie and I may be actually kin. We come from so close. Our people come from so close, Mississippi. You know, that's what I call it. So close, Mississippi. We might be actually kinfolk for real. But talk a little bit about your trajectory, you know, in faith and in the work, and how that's then, you know, mushroomed into what it is that you are now doing. And I really want to talk about some of the stuff you're working on right now.
Yeah, well, first, let me just say that hopefully I won't repeat too much of what Jim said. You know, think that we might be twins or something as I talk about my journey. But you know, my family moved from Mississippi to Chicago during the what they call the Great Migration in around 65. And my mother had remarried. And, you know, my stepfather about, 10 years later, actually, maybe even about 10 years later, became a minister himself. So that transformed me into a PK, a preacher's kid. He was a minister in the African-American missionary Baptist tradition. And through my singing in the choir and participating in the church, and becoming familiar with the biblical theology and that kind of stuff, being exposed to it, I had a lot of questions. I mean, it didn't seem to all add up, and so that sent me on a journey, seeking answers. And my stepfather's oldest boy, my stepbrother, became sort of, somebody that I looked up to. And as the years went by, he got involved in the late 60s or early 70s in Chicago in the Black Panther Party. And so I followed behind him and was, selling newspapers and that kind of stuff. And as the years went by, I came to reached a personal epiphany or place where I thought that it didn't really make sense to me that if there was only one God, then, that there should be this division among folk who were reaching out to this entity. And I got, but however, through working with my brother and being involved in things, and actually my wife, when I met my wife, she was, we were in high school, and she was actually active in, student politics. And so, we kind of got together and we were working together around political stuff. Over time, I reached this sense that, there was really no separation between the sacred and the secular, that, the life we live in is the life we live in. And, even reflecting on some of the biblical, on the biblical lessons, they're just lessons about people living their life. It wasn't anything special. So I worked, I was in Chicago back in the early 80s when working with a young guy named Lou Palmer. He and his wife were activists, and they ended up starting a initiative that resulted in the election of the first Black mayor in Chicago, Harold Washington. And my wife and I were very much part of that. And after he was elected, we had went around doing organizing. After we elected, people in the community became sort of disaffected. They told us when it was time for his second term, I know they told me, they said, hey, the first term, y'all, he said, all we had to do was vote for Washington, and, and that was enough. And then we went downtown to get a job, and they told us we had to be qualified, so it didn't really make a difference having Washington in office. So I thought, well, maybe politics is not the answer to the problems in the community of African descent. And I got involved in economics. I opened a buyback recycling center in the community, and did that for a number of years. A friend of mine encouraged me to go back to school. I went to a school up in New Hampshire, weekend program. And shortly after I graduated, they called me and they said, hey, would you like to come up here and be the administrator? Because our administrator quit. And, I had never thought about working at a college or being involved. But I was like, yeah, okay, I want to do something. With the people that I talked to in Chicago at the time, they were like, oh, well, we know you, and you do recycling. You're not, you're not an academic. And so I said, let me go up here and find out how this program works, and maybe I can come back to Chicago and start one. And that was like about 40 years ago. And I came up to, it was New Hampshire College at the time. Now it's Southern New Hampshire University. I was the administrator for their master's degree in community economic development. And, that was a values-based program. I graduated in 92. And, it was a program that looked at, the role of people in communities and suggested that they should be able to control the economics. So, and, while there, they as part of the staff, I taught several courses, that turned me into college professor. And I was there for about almost 20 years. While there, I met a young man in in Manchester, New Hampshire, where I lived and worked, who was the minister for the local UU church. He was an African American from Chester, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. And after about 4 or 5 years, he moved on to a new position. I remained at the church and was, involved. When I came from Chicago to New Hampshire, one of the first things I did, because it was probably the population of African descent in Manchester, New Hampshire at the time was maybe between 2 and 5%. And so, in looking for community and for opportunities to create community, I identified the NAACP. So I started working with them over the years, served in most of the officer positions, including they finally required me to serve a term as president of the local branch. And eventually they closed the master's program. So I said I'd do some consulting and still active with the church. And one day I saw in the newsletter an announcement that they were looking for a person to work with the UUA. And so I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that looks interesting. And with the kind they described the work, it sounded a lot like the stuff that I had been doing as an administrator at the college, working with congregations. I had been teaching classes and, various topics. So I applied for the job. And in the course of, in the final interview, I discovered that the job I was applying for was, the title is regional lead, but it was to serve as the bishop, who is the supervisor of the people who go out to the churches, And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I can do that, and was hired and worked for the UUA up until February of this year, and after while about 10, 15 years ago, I was introduced to the reparations movement and the organization, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, and was a member of that group. And then in about could it be 10 years ago, worked with some folk to form a chapter of that organization. And because of the demographics in New England, most chapters are based in the city, but we created a regional chapter that included all 6 New England states. So it's the New England chapter in Cobra, and have served and currently serving as the male co-chair. The organization has a policy of leadership is both male and female. So there's a female co-chair and a male co-chair. And all of this was related to my belief, again, that, there's really no division between the secular, and the sacred. Even while working at the college, I developed a course called Faith-Based Community Economic Development. And in talking with the students, I was saying that this course is about, living out your sacred values in the secular marketplace, and I heard echoes of that sentiment with our brother down in North Carolina who's doing Moral Mondays, saying like, and I met a young guy in New York who had as his signature, show me your show me your behavior. You're showing me your belief, something to that effect. But in any event, Unitarian Universalism was a good fit. And I became a Unitarian Universalist as an adult. And so in talking with family and friends who know me for years, I say, what, within the African-American community, that denomination is not well known. People would say like, well, what is a Unitarian Universalism? Why are you involved in that? And I tell them, it's like, well, it was 2 groups that came together. The Unitarians believe there's only one God, and the Universalists believe that whatever you call it, we're talking about the same thing. So, that was sort of how that led me to here I am today on your show, Bishop.
I appreciate it, brother, because as you now have laid out, both Brother Jim and myself, and I would hasten to say most of us didn't start out with what we thought we was going to do, but have ended up in doing the stuff we knew we were led and moved and the right fits, but did not plan. I did not plan to be all the stuff I'm doing and involved in now. All I wanted to do was join one of these funk bands. I could have picked them. I could have picked any one of them from the Ohio Players, Earth, Wind and Fire, Daz Band, Brick, Commodore, any of them. I wanted to just put me in there and let me play my little chords and make some money, make a living. And that's what I thought I wanted to be. And I would say the divine has an order. And it sometimes doesn't necessarily match up initially with what you think your order ought to be, but it certainly leads you to these places and spaces. We got a few more minutes. Here's where I want to situate what these stories mean to me. We're in a current moment, and it's a current moment that has some interesting energies. I'll use that term. For better or for worse, some might say we are now facing fascism. So Jim, as you were talking about some of the political stuff that you've been engaged in with Indivisble and its values-based mission, certainly what it is, Brother Willie, from a faith perspective, there are many people who are on the other side of the aisle, if you will, who we would call the least of these. And many of our traditions, faith traditions, value work and service. And in fact, it's the call of the divine to situate our work with those who are in places and spaces of difference as it relates to resources. Here we are for whatever, I'm not really interested at this point if you are you're a Republican or a Democrat, not really interested if you're a liberal or conservative, not really interested if you red or blue and all of the other things, purple and all of the other things. What I am interested in is in what are the ways in which the way we think about how do we fashion our society and our communities so that we all have a shared sense of ownership and stake in such a community, and that we are heard, recognized, and seen and benefit from that said community. And that's where we've got to fight like the Dickens, in my opinion, to get there. This American quote democracy is not really a democracy. It's what we call it, but it's not really a democracy because there's too much money involved. Anyway, that's my personal opinion. And yet, what we got to do is find a way to be human to human and to have things in common. Talk a little bit, Jim, about and then will it where you find yourself and where you find the work is for you at this juncture.
Well, before that, I just got to say, hearing your story and hearing your story earlier, I teach at Heart. I don't teach there a lot, but one of the things I do is I supervise the seniors. They have to make an album before they graduate, and it's a big deal making your first record. And we talk about that, and then they make that record. They think, oh, here we go out into life. I said, well, do you have a plan? And they never have a plan. I said, at least start out with a plan so you can have the first thing that you fail at. So you get the failure right out of the way. And then
Right.
here's your plan. Then you park as close to your plan as you can get and just move your car and get, and you guys are like me. Maybe you had a plan, but you're just parking near it right now. They rarely work out perfectly. So I think, we find ourselves, you and I were talking about Marvin Gaye and James Brown rising up to meet a moment. And we're in another moment right now. I have been lucky enough to speak at schools lately. And I think you could break things down a little bit like my parents had an existential crisis with World War II. And, all of us to some extent grew up in the shadow of that and the reaction to that. And then for my generation, I'm probably a little bit older than you guys. I had a draft card, and I had to figure out Vietnam, and I saw my friends not come home. So that was our sort of existential crisis. I mean, certainly growing up in the 60s, I mean, that was a wild, crazy time. I grew up thinking that the system is when you don't like the leader, you shoot him. There were so many people being shot in the 60s. So to that effect, we've been here before. The next generation figured out what their existential crises were. This generation is in their existential crisis. It's all around them. They're like, we're all in this like boiling frogs, right? We don't know it's boiling until it boils. So they're in it. I think it's really hard. So the hardest thing for me right now is to get young people to recognize and acknowledge the danger of the backslide into authoritarianism, which is pretty well documented. It's not something we really argue about anymore. It's happening. So what do? We have to shore our thing up. We have to get people in office. Right now, that's still a thing that we believe in, that are going to reflect our values. And then we have to show up with enough people, 3.5% is the imagined number, in a sustained active state that will stop the backslide into autocracy or fascism. And I don't know how much time we have to do it. I'm always optimistic because I'm not supposed to be here anymore. I was 22 when they said you have 1 year to live. So it's been a long year. I have to remain optimistic because somebody somewhere thought like, all right, let's punch his clock for a little more time. But I think there's a lot of work to do right now.
Brother Woulard, where you at?
Yeah, well, I find it, well, first, let me just say that where we are now, we've always been. This project grew out of mercantilism, where the crown said, hey, you can go over there and set up. That's fascism. And there's nothing that's being said today that we haven't heard before, again and again, over and over. So I think that there is a tendency for folk to become, I want to say become confused or really not pay attention, and to kind of buy into the dominant paradigm. But what we're seeing now, we've always seen. This is America. This enterprise is, what it has always been. Now, in terms of how it presents itself, there's been a kindler, gentler version of it, but it's been the same, pretty much. I mean, when we, I think someone had said earlier in the show, got to the point where they, folk, they shooting each other. They've been shooting each other. That was Abraham Lincoln. That was the first Civil War in the United States. The first Civil War, there were two Civil Wars. And the first Civil War, they called the Revolutionary War. And the second Civil War, they call it the Civil War. But the first Civil War was between the citizens of Britain and the British government. And the difference between the first and the second Civil War is that in the first Civil War, the enslavers won. We know about George Washington. I was up there in New Hampshire where, our sister Ona Judge fled Philadelphia after being shuttled back and forth to Virginia every 6 months so that she wouldn't be freed under the laws at that time, and he and his wife Martha spent the rest of their life trying to re-enslave this woman. We know the history of Thomas Jefferson. So, there is this kind of, I think there's a nostalgia, and I won't go too deep. I'll shut up in a minute, but there's a nostalgia for the American experience for the first Civil War, just like there is for the second, except the second Civil War, they talk about the lost cause and they glorify the flag and the, heritage and all, and they do it for the first Civil War as well, except it was the successful cause and they glorify the flag. They just talked about putting out an executive order about, you can't burn the flag. So, I think that we need to, I think that we're talking about culture and values and everything. We know that, that the universe moves in cycles, say the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Who was it? Quincy Jones, who said everything must change, and it's true. So we go through these cycles, and I think that what we must do, which is the only thing we can do, is to be true to ourselves. Across time, as far back in time as you can go, and across space anywhere in the world, if you're talking about a faith tradition, usually the highest manifestation of divinity is the creator. So we are most our divine selves when we're being creative, working to create the world that we feel needs to exist. I'll stop there. I'm complete.
You show to not be a preacher. You show know how to preach. I'll say this, and I agree to both of your concerns. There is something to say about what I would call electoral politics, right? There's something to say about how in this brand of democratic republic, and which is what I would think we really are, rather than a democracy, a representative form, of governance. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, we got the words right, or closer to right, but it is now, how do you live into these ideals, right? How do you live into them? One of the things I think we must do is figure out how we do it without the government's necessary help, right? How do we together really actually do it, and not depend so much, and this is my own personal opinion, folks, my personal opinion. For some of us, we lean way too far into electoral politics, as it was going to be the thing that was going to be the ultimate salvation. So the modern day classic civil rights struggle, really was at its height, in 1964 with the Public Accommodations Act, in 1965 the Voting Rights Act. And from there, we've been on a slide backwards to the way things used to be, when we now have gutted, for example, the Voting Rights Act. Public accommodations, we just about segregate ourselves. But let me say, not only do we do it ourselves, there are instrumentalities that help it stay in place. We built interstate highways, for example, in the 1950s and 60s that split communities. Interestingly, in the context of urban America, the communities that got split most often were, I'll say less. But so that throughout the life cycle and time of us who are in this sojourn here in the America and the American project, I think what we do know that may necessitate our real consideration is, how do we come together, Jim, shared values, but then how do we work together so that we are recovering what it is that we do and can do to sustain ourselves? What you think about that?
There's a lot in there, right? So first we have to be uncomfortable, and we have to live and sit in discomfort. People who are comfortable need to be uncomfortable. And I think it's a good time to kind of think about the idea that there's more power in the grassroots right now and grassroots movements than there are in parties, in political parties. I was brought up to be a Democrat. I'm a registered Democrat. I vote Democrat because their values align with mine more. But right now, we're the horses pulling that sled, the people that are out knocking on doors and doing that stuff. And you're right about electoral politics. It's not the answer to everything. It's up to us to build bigger communities and also to address, like you guys are both men of the cloth, right? There's people who take the same words you use and they flip them and they use it to justify what they're doing. I think we have to call that out. You guys have way more credibility in that space than I would, but I don't want to hear from some guy I don't want to hear a Bible quote from a guy who's using it to justify a corporatocracy or whatever it is, a kakistocracy, whatever he's putting together. It sort of invalidates the idea of a creator. To me, I just think, like, man, don't use those words because they're not for you. They're for you guys.
Right.
Brother Willie.
Yeah,
Go
brother, Reverend Bishop, you had mentioned, what was happening in 64, 65, 1964, 65. We had the Civil Rights Act of 1865, and the same thing happened, so, but one thing that happens too often is that we live in a society that is in a culture that's low context. So we don't, look at the whole picture, and either through history or even through current politics. Too often we find policy decision impacts being attributed to personal deficiency outcomes. So we got to be clear about, it's not one thing or the other. It's everything. It's voting. It's talking to your elected representative. It's talking to your neighbors. It's getting out in the street, making things known. We live in a society that breaks everything down, low context, binary, this or that. I will tell y'all that I am a registered Republican. And I did that for, a few years back, but I used it strategically because in the general election, you vote for who you want to. It's only in the primary that you're bound to, limited to voting in a party, So, we got part of that thing is not only do we have to learn new things in terms of decolonizing our mind, but there's a lot that we have to unlearn, even if we say, oh, well, let's go back to the good old days.
I would add to that.
Yes.
That's exactly what I was going to say is that there's this sort of artificial nostalgia for a world that never existed. And Americans are really great at that. We have movies, we have music, we have all these stuff, the original memes. Before there was an internet, there were still memes, right? These cultural things would permeate our consciousness and tell us there was a different past than there really was. And we should yearn for that to get back to simpler time. We shouldn't yearn for that because it wasn't that good. A lot of bad stuff happened, that you don't want to be nostalgic for bad stuff. Mm.
I'm with you on that. We're at our time tonight. I promise not to hold you before about an hour, and we're at that hour mark. Would you say a word, Jim, about what's coming up in October?
Well, first, let me thank you guys. I'm learning a lot just by listening. As it turns out, old people can still listen. So October, I have a big meeting on a Thursday with our local Indivisble, and we'll kind of get our planning together. We have a No Kings rally at the state capitol from 12 to 2 on October 18th. Tonight, I just confirmed one of my favorite groups to work with, Hartford Proud, the drum corps. I don't know if you know them. They're badass, and they're very inspiring kids to see. So it'll be more than just speechifying, I hope, but we'll have some good speakers. I'm looking at one now, and I might have a few words to say myself. So last time we had 10,000 people. I'd love to see that get to 15,000. I don't know. I think you guys are familiar with the 3.5% theory. So we're close. We're close. We're not there, but we're close.
Well, thank you. And that's again, No Kings 2, Part 2, right? All righty. October 18th. And the big meeting is going to be here in the capital city. The capital city. You said at St. James?
Our local meeting, we meet in the basement of St. James Episcopal Church. We're not denominational. We go and we meet at the Unitarian Church too. Whoever will have us, we will meet.
That's right. That's right. But the big rally will be here in Hartford again.
That's correct.
At the Capitol.
Yep, in the back.
In
what is in front and wave signs and stuff. People think like, oh, you're just waving signs. No, all those people get lit up, and if you can get, if there's 10,000 people and you get 10% of them to do something, that's a win. You're winning.
That's right. That's right. But Brother Willie, thank you, Brother Jim. Brother Willie, you're working in something in Alabama. Could you just say a little bit about what you're doing down there? In Tuskegee?
I'm actually doing some cooperative development. I'm working with a group here in Tuskegee, Alabama, to pull together a food producer and marketing cooperative, and it is a part of a national initiative for developing a Black food supply chain. I'm also working with the young group up in northern New England, centered in Maine, called the Northeast Federation of Cooperatives, working at developing, co-ops, which is, one of the challenges that we face. And when we start talking about what we're doing, is much of this is based and grounded in capitalism. The African transatlantic chattel enslavement system was, part of the birth of capitalism. And so we're working at developing some alternatives to capitalism that will allow us to not only survive, but also thrive. I'm complete.
All right. Here, lastly, I was thinking about how we might wrap tonight's conversation, and I was reflecting on the writer, the prophet, the leader of a generation ago. His name was James Baldwin, and let me just conclude with words he left us in his writing called The Fire Next Time. He said, "Life is tragic simply because the earth turns and the sun exorbitantly rises and sets one day for each of us. The sun will go down for the last time. Perhaps the whole root of our problem or our trouble, the human trouble, is that we will sacrifice all the beauty of our lives. We'll imprison ourselves in totems and taboos and crosses and blood sacrifices and steeples and mosques and races and armies and flags and nations in order to deny the fact of death, the only fact we really have. It seems to me that one ought to rejoice in the fact of death, ought to decide indeed to earn one's death by confronting the passion with passion, the conundrum of life. One is responsible for life. It is the small beacon in the terrifying darkness from which we come to which we shall return. Words of Jimmy Baldwin to think on. To think on for a little bit, that maybe the conundrum that we ought to be confronting, that we're trying to avoid death. Let's confront life and the living of life, and doing that, these are my words now, doing that in the context of community with common unity together. All right. This is just one episode, if you will, one just drop in the bucket of critical conversations and what I call relevant conversations that we have on these airways. Thank you all. Thank you, Brother Jim. Thank you, Brother Woulard, for joining me tonight in this conversation. Of course, I hope I can call on you again to join us again. And we're gonna get this right. We are better than we have been these last few centuries. Anyway, we can do better. We can do better, and that's where I am. That's where my faith, my activism, my music, my art, my creative energies, and I believe the two of you are in a similar space and place. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. Listen, we'll be back here at this same bat station at this same bat time for another episode of what we call Relevant Conversations with Bishop John Setters. Thank you, Brother Jim. Thank you, Brother Woulard.
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
Peace, peace, peace.